This is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast from booktopia.com.au. I'm Mark Harding, and today I am chatting with some of my fellow Booktopians about the books they're reading. Welcome to Joe Lewin, Joel Naoum, and Zia Keirouz. Hi guys, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hey Mark.
Hi Mark.
Let's start with you today, Joe. What are you reading and what are you liking about it?
I just finished. Look, I've got to start by saying that I appear to want to torture myself at the moment. I just finished reading a 600-page book, and I've just started reading a 700-page book.
Oh my God.
I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way it turned out. That I seem to have read all of the skinny books on my bedside table, and it's only the big fat ones to go. So I just finished reading the Lincoln Highway by Autobiography. So his previous book, A Gentleman in Moscow, was wildly popular, and I was a little bit late to the party on that one, and absolutely adored it. It's all about an aging gentleman who is in reduced circumstances in Russia and moves into a hotel where he then spends, several decades and gets to know all the ins and outs of the people that live in the hotel and all of the history that passes through the hotel in that time. The Lincoln Highway is really different. It's set in America. It's a road novel. And I don't know, I think I've heard some people kind of panning it. I actually found it really fun. It's very kind of it's like Steinbeck light, right? If you want to read John Steinbeck, but it's just a bit depressing for you, the Lincoln Highway has got all of those, elements of down and out folks in 1930s Midwestern America, on the road, traveling around, running from the law, getting up to mischief. The adjective rollicking could be applied. I don't know. Well, how else can I describe it? Has anyone else here read this one, or A Gentleman in Moscow?
We Ben did a podcast with Immortals a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a month back, and it was a really good conversation. He's a super interesting guy. But what you mentioned that it's quite different to A Gentleman in Moscow. I've not read either of them. What would you say the main difference is between the two books?
I guess because A Gentleman in Moscow is about a gentleman, right? He's quite a refined chap, and the boys in the Lincoln Highway are not refined. So I think that the tone is very different, right? Even though they're both historical novels, they're both about masculinity in some ways, but really A Gentleman in Moscow is about, kind of aging and loneliness and living through history, whereas the Lincoln Highway is all about coming of age, finding your place in the world, very different age groups of the men that it describes, and the
debauchery of youth.
Yeah, look, it's only a little bit light debauchery, I've got to say.
Oh,
as I say, Steinbeck light, Kerouac light, a lot less misogyny and a lot less depressing than either of those other authors. But yeah, a really enjoyable read. I powered through all 600 pages. I couldn't wait to get back to it.
So was it one of those books that is 600 pages is quite substantial, but you didn't feel like it? Like it's not. Yeah. You didn't feel like you were reading Tolstoy?
Yeah, no, totally. Totally. It looks impressive to read on the bus or in the park. Everyone thinks you're really smart, but actually, it just flies.
Awesome.
And so, what's the 700-page novel? I'm curious now.
Yeah, so I finished that. That just flew, and I went, 600 pages. That's nothing. I'm going to read 700 pages, and the 700-page novel is one that comes out in January next year. It's very hotly anticipated, and it's by Hanya Yanagihara. It's the follow-up to her beloved novel from 2015, A Little Life, and it's called To Paradise. I started the book with a certain degree of trepidation. I think in the way that I always do when I've read one book by an author, and to put it into perspective, A Little Life is one of my favourite books ever. I've only read one book by her, and then this is the next book. It's been 6 years since she last released something, and so, you know, you're quite nervous. And all I knew about the book before starting is that it's set in 3 time periods. It's set in 1893, 1993, in the middle of AIDS era New York, and 2093. Now, Joel
Wow.
and Mark, I know that you like a little bit of speculative fiction.
Yeah.
That's not my bag, and that could not be further from the subject material of A Little Life. And so it really worried me when I heard that there was going to be a futuristic element to this book. I feel like that's not on brand for her at all, and I have expectations. I've started reading it. The bit that I'm reading right now, I'm only about 100 pages in. It's the 1893 New York, and it is an alternate universe. So, but it's very...
What makes it an alternate universe? What's different in this one?
In this universe, and I won't tell you everything about it, because even just in the first 100 pages, you start reading it and you think this is just New York, a gentleman living in Washington Square in New York in 1893. And as you go, you realize that this New York is very different to the New York that we know from history. The first clue is when the protagonist, David Bingham, he comes home to his house that he shares with his wealthy grandfather, and his 2 siblings, his sister and brother, are coming over for dinner. His brother is bringing his husband, and his sister is bringing his wife. So you go, okay, well, this is not how 1893 was when I watched Gangs of New York, right? Like,
Yeah.
You know that something's very different, that the acceptance of different sexual preferences is wildly different to how New York was in history and even how New York is now. So I won't tell you about any more of the differences, because, as I say, it unfolds very slowly and it starts to give you clues that of the things that are different to what we really know. So I'm really fascinated. I'm really interested to see, is the 1993 section going to be 1993 as we knew it, or is it going to be 1993, 100 years on from this alternate universe, 1893, which I suspect it will be? And imagine what AIDS era New York would be like without homophobia, right? Like, that would be a very different conversation around the AIDS epidemic, without all of that, that horrible blame and pure fear of difference that that drove that time. So in her true to her style, the way she writes character. So A Little Life is all about character. A Little Life is just 4 guys in New York, present day, falling in and out of friendship and love with each other, and you learn through the novel about their their psychologies and why they are the way they are. There's not, it's not a big sweeping saga like this. It's all about emotion and character.
Famously makes people bawl with tears at the end, right?
Absolutely, all the way through, because there is one character in particular that is just tragic the whole way through. He has a tragic upbringing. He has a tragic adult life, and he can never move on from the tragedy of his life. And it's just heart-wrenching, right? So this has got the potential to do that, right? It's got the way you start to learn about this main character, David, and his feelings and his insecurities. You can see that we're building. So I hope that it's not going to. I'm a massive fan. I hope it's not going to disappoint me. I don't think so far it is going to. I think it's really interesting and different, but still has the best things about Hanya that we love.
It's so interesting. I'm so much, from what you've told me so far, I find this premise so much more appealing than A Little Life, which I heard about. Lots of people that I love and respect read and loved it, but I never read it because I just thought, that's not my bag. That's just going to depress me. But this sounds...
Yeah. But it totally sounds like a Joel book, right?
Yeah.
Like, Joel, you and Mark are all about the alternate universes. If I hear, oh, there's an alternate universe in it, no, thank you very much. That's not for me.
Yeah, alternate universes, or alternate history is hard to write at the best of times. And doing a 2093 that's potentially based on an alternate history, that would be really difficult to pull off. And I'm actually really excited to read that now. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, well, look, coming January 2022. So for our listeners, there's a little bit of a wait. Hopefully, maybe by the time I come around in this podcast again, I might have finished all 700 pages and I'll be able to tell you a little bit more. But it's one of those books I'm quite glad that I don't know much more than I do.
Excellent. Well, there you go, everybody. Add it to your wish list on booktopia.com.au. Get ready for January. Sounds like a great holiday read. Thanks for that, Joe. Moving on to Joel. What are you reading and what are you enjoying?
So the first book is something I really loved, but I should admit up front that it's a bit of a log roll because it was published by my partner, who is a publisher. But I should also say that I very rarely read her books because
you're a terrible partner. Because you're not supportive.
Well, because when I do, it's just that it puts the pressure on it, right? I don't always. If I do that and then I don't like it, then I have to pretend I've liked it. Really, if I'm going to be a good person, it just makes her upset, and she puts so much more into it than I do by reading it. So it's like it's not really. But the last book, one of the ones before this one that I read and loved was the first Devlin McTiernan book, which she also published, and I adored that. And so when she got the level of, when she was hyping this book at that level, I was thinking, all right, this one I'm going to have to read at some point. And I really, really love it. It's great fun. So I should point out, it's commercial fiction. It's not high literary, but it is really, really fun. So it's by Sarah Foster, who is mostly known as a thriller and psychological thriller writer in the past. But this book is quite different to the other stuff she's done. The basic premise, it's set in near future Britain, and it's got like elements of Children of Men and elements of The Handmaid's Tale, in the sense that it's about the fertility crisis. And what specifically is happening is that women are giving birth to babies who are otherwise completely healthy and they're stillborn. And no one knows what's causing it. And the number of stillbirths are rising. And then the country is freaking out. And it's set not that far in the future, several years in the future from now, but not like 20 years. It's only about 10 years, I think. So it's post-pandemic. And it's the first novel I've read that is imagining what our culture will be like when the pandemic is in the rearview mirror. So there's this sort of high level of monitoring that happens by the government. Everyone has these watches that they are expected to wear all the time that track them. And I think until the point that this fertility crisis happened, people didn't think about it much, as you can imagine. That's because they weren't really using it to track or stop people's movement, except to help with the pandemic stuff. So people just appreciated it. And now that, they're starting to track women and whether or not they are getting pregnant, and they have to report any sales of pregnancy tests, and women are being tracked, it becomes this much more scary thing. So it follows three storylines, three generations of women. The main two characters, I would say, are mother-daughter. I don't want to spoil anything about their story so much, except so the mother is a midwife, and the daughter is about 17, 18, I think. And she, in the opening chapter, suspects that she might be pregnant. So it kicks off this like thriller, basically, where you're trying to and I know I've just given you all this world building stuff, and it makes it sound like it's much more speculative fiction than it actually is. Most of it is just about characters and plot, and what is actually happening is this thrill ride through, this sort of semi-post-apocalyptic Britain that is with the government shady government elements after the main characters, and it's great. And partway through the book, the third generation of woman comes into it, and she's the grandmother, but she's also essentially she's Germaine Greer, and by another name, and it's just so good. Like, it's so much fun to have that character in the mix of this type of story. It's like she's today's Germaine Greer, not like Germaine Greer from so problematic, but sort of lovable in a very particular way, and just really, really fascinating. It's just I don't want to give too much away because I think there's a lot of stuff in it that's really interesting. But if you like thrillers, if you like the spec fic component, if you like any of those, if any of that what I've said appeals, I think you would really, really enjoy. Such an easy book to read, and the characters are genuinely compelling and interesting. I really loved it. But
I was going to ask. It sounds like it sounds like so timely. Do you know how when she wrote it? She's apparently been working on this book for like a decade. So I imagine that post-pandemic stuff has come into it more recently in the rewrites. Yeah. I don't know, but I would assume. I know she's been working on it for a long time. Because it doesn't fit with her other books as neatly, I think she struggled. I think she would have struggled to get it published, even though it's great. And I think she's changed publishers to go to HarperCollins with this book, and I think that's why this one has finally gotten published. And it's so great. Also, the cover is amazing. It says nesting dolls, Matryoshka dolls. It's really cool. It's great book. Really, really love it. Did you mention the title at the beginning? I think we might have missed it.
I can't believe I didn't mention the title at the beginning. The book, it's called The Hush.
Yeah.
And the only trigger warning there, I guess, is the fact that there are still stillbirths in it, right? So if you've had any kind of experience like that, but I don't think it's not a huge part of it, right? It's happening, but it's not like really graphic or anything. So I think that part of it is not as big a deal. But yeah, loved it.
That's great. Thanks, Joel. What's the other book that you're reading?
So the other book I've only just started, and I know that Joe has read this book. I believe Joe has read this book, Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. You have read it, haven't you, Joe? Yes.
How many pages does that one have? Quite a few.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a fit. Like, I'm not reading it. I'm reading a digital copy of it. So I think it's about 600 pages.
Yeah,
I've got it right next to me.
Have you finished it yet, Mark? You were starting it, weren't you?
Yeah, it's 500 and hang on, I'm just looking at my copy here. 580.
Oh, that's pages. A snack, you guys.
Yeah. Yes, I could sing the praises of this book for ages, and I wasn't expecting to do that when I picked it up, because I've never really been the hugest Franzen fan, but I loved it. I'm very curious to hear what you think, Joel.
Well, I'm so early in it; it's hard to know. But my background with Jonathan Franzen is that I absolutely loved the corrections when I read it, a decade ago, whenever it came out, and then I think I read Freedom and maybe the one after that, but I didn't like them anywhere near as much, and was sort of reading them out of some sort of, I'm in the publishing industry, I should read these books sort of feeling to it. And I think I wouldn't have read this book if it wasn't for the fact that so many people that I know who either have never read a Jonathan Franzen or haven't read one for a long time have read this book and really, really liked it. And I just think I've got to give it a go. And so far, I'm like, I don't know, I'm less than 100 pages in. I'm 50 pages in or something. And it's just really funny. And it seems to capture that feeling I had with the corrections, this sort of arch, sort of observant eye. He's always had that, but I feel like he meandered around in this world that he didn't much like, and he was quite angry for a long time after the corrections. That's the sense I got from Jonathan Franzen.
Yeah, it's funny, but it's not like ha funny.
No. But
it's
satirical.
Funny. It's
satirical
just like,
funny.
Yeah, it's just like, that's so funny.
the sort of observational funny where you're like, oh, I know that type of person, that type of that's what I mean by it's not ha funny. But
it's also as you get on and as you start to get to know those characters a bit better, really touching as well, because they are archetypes, and you do recognize their types, but you get to know them so much more personally as the book goes on.
Yeah, which I think he did in the corrections too, really, really well. He had these people who are almost caricatures at the beginning of the book, and then by the end you feel like they're real people. He's taken this type and turned it into a person. And I gather this is part of the first book in the sort of trilogy of books about this family, and it's set in the 70s, I think. and I believe the next one is going to be set in the 90s.
I didn't know that. There's more coming.
Yeah, so the same family is going to cover them through the years. So I find that concept quite fascinating. Not that I've finished the book, so I don't know where it ends, but I'm curious to see what he does with that. I think I'm really glad he's found this family to talk about, because I think it's where he's at his best. Midwestern, like normal people. Supposedly normal people, and then telling the stories of what they're really like. He's not like he gets compared to like American literary giants, like people like John Updike and that type of person, Don DeLillo, and that type of author. But I always felt like he's just a little bit more of a close observational domestic storyteller.
Yeah,
and he's better.
I think
he's better
like
when
Anne
he does
Patchett,
that,
right?
Yeah, or Anne Tyler or something like.
Yes,
really
exactly.
Close reading of people and situations and domestic interactions. Yeah. And I think he's much better at that.
And it's just, you're right, you're like, this is just a suburban family. Yeah. And they're a suburban family with all this, but as you read on, you find out that they're a suburban family with all these like repressed experiences that they're like, they're trundling along pretending to be as white as bread and as clean as snow, but as you go through, you realize they've got all this trauma in their lives that they're trying to push down.
And it seems like it's given him an opportunity to, like, because it's set in the 70s and he has, there's this culty religious youth pastor who's running this youth group sort of thing called Crossroads, which is I'm sure is a real name of a youth group. I feel like he's like finally getting it, because the correction sort of came out and his other books came out right around the time that a lot of the books, a lot of the type of literary person he was getting cancelled. Great white man of letters, the sort of like that type of writer was like starting to be really uncool, and I think he's really been really angry about that for a long time. This book gives him a chance to sort of, I don't know, punch about that, or swing some punches about that, but he's had a little bit more time to think about it. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you, Mark.
No, I was going to say, I think it's interesting what you said before about how great it is that he's like discovered these characters, and I think that's like there's a certain almost joy that comes from just the writing. Like you can almost tell how involved in the writing process he was. There's something that just kind of like jumps off the page about it and just is completely absorbing. And the setting also really comes to life. I was completely immersed in this novel and I loved it. I wasn't aware that he had said that he was going to do the next book set in the 90s. I knew that he had mentioned that this was going to be a trilogy, but I was taking that with a grain of salt, because he also said at one point that this was going to be the last novel he ever wrote. So
my information could be terrible, but that's what I heard about it, and that's only going in. Like I said, I haven't finished it, so I don't know. That could be nonsense. But very interesting. If you've ever read of Jonathan Franzen book before and then either found it disappointing or find the idea of going back into another one daunting or annoying or too literary or something, I just think this is just such a great re-entry into his books. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
So far.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Joel. We'll move on now to Zia. Zia, what are you reading and what are you liking about it?
Hi. Okay, so I've 3/4 the way through one and only started the next one, but I usually go on like feelings, when you feel like a certain genre and you're like, oh, I feel like this and I feel like that. Well, I felt like a good, but I'm reading Michelle Obama's autobiography, Becoming. I've always, I think First Lady, but I've never read any of the other political books. I am a poli-sci major from a very long time ago, so I'm interested in that vertical. So I was like, oh, I'm going to read this. I usually don't particularly like reading them, but I was like, I really like her. I've seen her on Ellen. I'm going to give it a go. And everybody raved about it last year. I'm always late to the party, like I said. I don't have time to read as much as I'd like to. And I am really liking it. I think it is so well written. She's so relatable as just a person, and I'm really liking it. So she's a great writer. I know that they're saying that she wrote a lot of it herself, so it's not like somebody.
Though Barack Obama has served, when he was criticized for taking so long to write his own memoir, first half of his memoir, he was criticized for that, and he said, well, I actually write my books.
Yeah, funny.
Specifically throwing shade at his wife. So
oh, really? Wow. There you go. But it's so it's really well written. I don't know. I haven't read his one, but one of the things that I really liked about it, to be honest, is that it really talks a lot about her as an individual, not his presidency, and how, the first half of the book is all about her childhood and growing up in Southside Chicago, and just the normal kind of poor upbringing she had. And her parents were working class. She lived, in an area that is now a ghetto, and she was literally growing up in that area while it became and witnessed it become, they called it white flight, in that area where more affluent and more well-off white families were left, and it was just left to become a slum. And how much she was involved and how ambitious she was, and she said, and how organized and methodical, and she goes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I planned my life. And then she describes Barack Obama as like a whirlwind, and he's so unorganized. He's the guy who just leaves his stuff everywhere, and would put newspapers and books. He's a big reader. He kind of takes to digest things, where she's very yep, and they're so different. And I really like that insight into there. And she's funny. And now I'm just getting into the part where he's running for president, right? And one thing that I didn't know, and I probably should have actually, she really didn't want him to run for president. Like, this was like her worst nightmare, because he was already, a senator, and even before that, he was just so unavailable. And she goes, how is this going to affect my family? And how she kind of put it as like that she really admired him and knew what a great man he was, and how so, and she goes, I would want that for my country. So why would I kind of deny Americans such a great president for my selfishness, right? Because I think that is what a president should embody, type thing. And she talked, which was really kind of insightful, and I just found it really, really nice. It's relatable. It's an easy read, and it's quite inspiring, really. And it gives you a bit of, and it doesn't talk too much about the complexities of American politics, which I really like, because that could be so confusing, like swing states and all the actual elections and how they work and that. So somebody who doesn't live in the US and is not really into politics would really be able to follow along as well. Whereas the other, I would probably say, other books written about American politics sometimes just get really, you're just like, oh, skip, because I don't understand it. That's probably the one I'm reading, and I'm almost done that one.
Well, it's probably like, even though it came out, I think, before the kind of the glut of Trump books did, it's probably a nice antidote to those at the moment as well. Because I've tried reading some of them, and they're depressing.
Yes.
Super depressing. Yeah. I think it's a pretty amazing. I mean, it's such a bestseller. It's one of those books that people clearly connected with, and I think you can't. If you've read the book, you can't. A lot of people keep saying, she should run for president and stuff. And like, if you read that book,
right?
you know that she would never do that.
She really disliked the entire process. She literally, I did not want this to happen. I do not like politics because of X, Y, and Z. So, and one of the things is that, and I think he writes this way, but they're just like, they are believers in hope, right? Faith and hope and for change, and his slogan, right? And it gives you a little bit of happy feels about the kind of the future of the world, and that things, are not as bad as you think, and there are people out there that are good, that want the benefit, and blah, blah, blah. And moving on, I was like, I'm going to kind of stick to that theme. I picked up this book that's been sitting on my shelf for a while. It's A Political History of the World, 3,000 Years of War and Peace by Jonathan Holslag. Holslag? I don't know. So this one is probably, it's history. It's pretty much a history book, but focuses on conflict, war and peace, and history, and how it relates to conflict in societies and empires and all that kind of things. And I'm really fascinated with that stuff, because us in our generations, we usually look back 2 generations, or back, my grandfather, World War I, World War II, blah, blah, blah. And we get there's always this whole the audacity of the world, we're going backwards, the war and all this kind of stuff. But if you actually take a microscope and pull back, the world's really always been in conflict. Humans have always done that. And learning about history kind of makes you really have a different perspective on the state of the world as we know it now, that it's the safest it's ever been, mortality rates, and also how wars are fought, and how conflict and tension and alliances are forged, and how, you go, this society is about to be obliterated. Like, I can sit here, at the beginning of the book, they talked about all these empires and people that are actually have been obliterated, right? And how it's just life and history, and this stuff is kind of normal, where some of the stuff we look at now and we go, when you look at it in small time, it's really overwhelming, and you get really scared and depressed about it. But if you look at back, it's kind of been the flow, the ebbs and flows of history and of human existence, really, from the, let's say, when did this book covers, I think, from, not the Industrial Revolution, where is it? It says, give me a sec. Yep, I can't find it now. But
3,000 years.
3,000.
3,000, but it's from the...
It's like BC, presumably.
Yeah. So 1,000 BC, and up to now, and then I think it gets to the end. I think is getting to China and the US, and how the tensions and how the political powers, how they communicate and what it means, and when these things happen, this is usually what that means, and that kind of stuff, which is quite insightful. And people who are interested in history and that kind of stuff would probably really enjoy it. I wouldn't say that it's written like the factual book. This happened, and this person said this, and this happened, and then what about this, and this theory and this concept, and that's how it's set out. So I wouldn't say this is a fun read, but it is a really, really cool, interesting, and read if you like this kind of stuff. Sorry,
that's awesome. I like it.
Yeah.
I want to have a read. I like the idea of exploring the patterns through history of why we go to war, and why we end up at peace as well.
Yeah, and it tells you how many times we've done this, and you know how the whole saying, history repeats itself. It does, but when you don't know about it, that's why it repeats itself. And if you know about it, you can, you'd hope that there could be change in. And it talks about technology. It talks about war methods. It talks about neoliberal thought of like the how life is important now. Every life matters, whereas 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, not all life mattered. And just the thought of that concept is sometimes people overlook that, that kind of thing. So yeah, all those points just give me, this is my happy reading at night. It gives me really weird dreams, I'll be honest. I fight zombies in wars and I speak to presidents and stuff in my dreams. It's weird.
What chapter of that book is about fighting zombies?
No, because you know how I'm like all about zombies. So zombies always end up in my brain, but mix
anyway.
that with politics and history and Obama and stuff, and I'm just
That's awesome. Thank you, Zia. I'm eager to read that one as well. I love a good broad world history narrative. I was going to ask is because a lot of books that I've read that are like that tend to kind of overemphasize the West. Is it a true kind of global history, or does it have that kind of focus on the West?
Look, I'm not that far into it to see how much is how leveled it is, but what I will say is it covers a lot of empires and areas that I've never even heard of, and I would say I'm not an expert in this field, but I'm not a layman either. So I would say it's pretty broad, that it covers, it covers the majority of the globe and how that all work together. I would say it doesn't focus on one area. If that was your
yes. Thank you so much for that, Zia. And thank you, Joe and Joel, for all the books that you've talked about today. We have some light reading and some very heavy reading to be getting on with there after all that. So yeah, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everybody who tuned in to listen. You can find links to all of the books that we've spoken about today in the show notes, or you can just head over to a little website we like to call booktopia.com.au. Have a look around for all of the books that are available. I'm sure you'll find something that you'll like. You'll add it to your cart. You'll buy it. Helps us keep the podcast running and keep the business going. And Booktopia is just a great website, and you should all check it out. Did I do a good job of selling the website?
Well done.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thanks to everybody for listening. And until next time, never stop reading.